A world shaped by shadows, the slave trade, a dark stain on human history. Two major systems, the Arab slave trade and the Atlantic slave trade, left millions brutalized and broken. Understanding these systems is crucial. Their legacies continue to shape our world today. We must confront this painful past to build a better future. Ancient global trends show how interconnected our world has always been, with trade routes spanning continents and cultures. Today, the shadow of slavery persists in the form of modern human trafficking affecting millions worldwide. Addressing both historical and modern forms of slavery is essential for creating a just and equitable world. From the Silk Road to the trans-Saharan trade routes, ancient global trends reveal a world deeply interconnected through commerce and culture. In the present day, modern slavery takes many forms, from forced labor to human trafficking, impacting millions across the globe. By understanding the past and addressing the present, we can work towards a future free from the shadows of slavery. The sands of time. They whisper tales of ancient civilizations, of empires that rose and fell, and of the countless souls who traversed these vast expanses. Among these stories is the profound and often overlooked history of the Arab slave trade. The Arab slave trade, deeply woven into the fabric of the Arab world, was not merely a footnote in history. It was a complex and multifaceted institution that played a significant role in shaping the social, economic, and cultural landscapes of the region. From the bustling markets of Baghdad to the ancient cities of Cairo and Damascus, the trade in human lives was a grim reality that spanned centuries. This trade stretched back centuries before the Atlantic slave trade, with its roots deeply embedded in the early days of the Arab Empire. The maritime routes that crisscrossed the Indian Ocean, the Red Sea, and the Mediterranean were arteries through which not only goods, but also human beings were transported. These routes connected the Arab world with Africa, Europe, and Asia, facilitating a vast network of trade that included spices, textiles, and tragically slaves. Its roots lay in the 7th century, intertwined with the rise of Islam and the expansion of the Arab Empire. As the Islamic caliphates expanded their territories, they brought with them a new social and legal order. The early Islamic conquests saw the incorporation of vast lands and diverse peoples into the Arab Empire, and with this expansion came the practice of slavery. Though Islam forbade the enslavement of fellow Muslims, it allowed for the enslavement of non-believers. This religious and legal framework provided a justification for the enslavement of those who were captured in wars or raids, or who were purchased from distant lands. Islamic legal texts and religious doctrines outlined the conditions under which slavery was permissible, creating a system that was both regulated and widespread. This religious and legal framework provided the justification for a trade that would ensnare millions over the course of its long history. The slave markets of the Arab world were places where human lives were bought and sold, where the fates of individuals were determined by the highest bidder. These markets were not hidden or secret. They were integral parts of the urban landscape, visible to all who walked the streets of cities like Baghdad, Cairo, and Zanzibar. The Arab slave trade was part of a broader pattern of global trade that saw the movement of goods, ideas, and people across continents. Ancient global trends in trade and conquest often involved the subjugation and enslavement of conquered peoples, a practice that was not unique to the Arab world, but was seen in various forms across different civilizations. The interconnectedness of these ancient trade networks facilitated the spread of slavery as a common practice, deeply embedding it into the socio-economic structures of the time. Today, the echoes of these ancient practices can still be felt in the modern world. Despite the abolition of slavery in many parts of the world, modern slavery persists in various forms, including human trafficking, forced labor, and exploitation. The global trend of modern slavery is a stark reminder that the fight against human bondage is far from over. The legacy of the Arab slave trade, along with other historical forms of slavery, continues to influence contemporary issues and challenges in the fight for human rights and dignity. The persistence of these practices highlights the need for continued vigilance and action to eradicate all forms of human exploitation. Across deserts and seas. The Arab slave trade was vast and enduring, spanning over a millennium. It stretched from the shores of East Africa to the Iberian Peninsula, encompassing a complex network of trade routes that crisscrossed continents and cultures. Arab traders, driven by economic and social forces, ventured deep into Africa, exchanging goods for human beings. This trade was part of a larger global trend of ancient commerce, where human lives were commodified alongside spices, gold, and textiles. The Arab trade routes were integral to the broader network of ancient global trade, linking Asia, Africa, and Europe in a web of economic exchange. Today, the legacy of such practices persists in the form of modern slavery, affecting millions worldwide and highlighting the enduring impact of historical trade networks. Efforts to combat modern slavery continue globally, with international cooperation and rehabilitation programs aiming to address and rectify the deep-seated issues rooted in these ancient practices. Cultural echoes and economic tremors. The Arab slave trade left an undeniable mark on the cultures and societies it touched, shaping the very fabric of the regions involved. The influx of African slaves into the Arab world led to a profound cultural exchange, influencing music, language, and cuisine in ways that are still evident today. However, this exchange was brutally one-sided, with enslaved Africans enduring unimaginable hardships. Enslaved Africans were stripped of their identities, forced to assimilate, and subjected to horrific conditions, leaving scars that would last generations. The Arab slave trade was part of a larger pattern of ancient global trends, where human lives were commodified and traded across continents, reflecting the interconnectedness of ancient economies. Today, the echoes of this dark history persist in the form of modern slavery, reminding us of the ongoing struggle for human rights and dignity. The global trend of human trafficking continues to plague societies, making it imperative to address and combat these injustices. Efforts by international organizations and educational campaigns are crucial in raising awareness and fighting against the remnants of this historical atrocity, ensuring a future where freedom and dignity are universal rights. As the 15th century dawned, a new chapter of human misery began, the transatlantic slave trade. This era marked a significant and tragic turning point in human history, where the quest for economic gain overshadowed the value of human life. The vast and uncharted Atlantic Ocean became a corridor of suffering, as European nations sought to expand their empires and increase their wealth through the exploitation of African labor. However, the roots of this exploitation can be traced back to ancient global trends of slavery and human trafficking, seen in civilizations such as Rome, Greece, and Egypt, where slaves were integral to economic and social structures. European powers, driven by the insatiable hunger for wealth and labor, turned their eyes towards the African continent. The rich resources and the potential for a new labor force made Africa an irresistible target. Explorers and traders ventured into unknown territories, mapping the coasts and establishing the first contacts with African societies. These initial encounters were often marked by a mix of curiosity, trade, and the ominous beginnings of exploitation. This exploitation was not new. It echoed the ancient practices seen in civilizations such as Rome, Greece, and Egypt, where slaves were integral to economic and social structures. The transatlantic slave trade, however, would amplify these ancient practices on an unprecedented scale. This marked the beginning of a brutal system that would see millions of Africans shipped across the Atlantic in horrific conditions. The Middle Passage, as it came to be known, was a journey of unimaginable suffering. Enslaved Africans were packed into the holds of ships, enduring weeks or even months of grueling travel. They faced disease, malnutrition, and abuse, with many not surviving the journey. Those who did were often scarred for life, both physically and emotionally. This system of human trafficking and forced labor was a continuation of ancient global trends, now amplified on an unprecedented scale. The dehumanization and commodification of human beings became a cornerstone of the economic systems of the time. Their lives treated as mere commodities, these men, women, and children were sold in markets, their fates determined by the highest bidder. The dehumanization they experienced was profound as they were stripped of their identities, cultures, and families. The legacy of the transatlantic slave trade is a dark chapter in human history, one that continues to impact societies around the world to this day. It serves as a stark reminder of the depths of human cruelty and the enduring struggle for justice and equality. Modern slavery, in the form of human trafficking, forced labor, and exploitation, persists globally, echoing the ancient and transatlantic practices, and highlighting the ongoing need for vigilance and action against such atrocities. The fight against modern slavery is a continuation of the struggle against the inhumanity that began centuries ago, reminding us that the quest for human dignity and freedom is far from over. Chains of commerce, shackles of oppression, the Atlantic trade's grip. The Atlantic slave trade, a dark chapter in human history, was a complex and brutal system that spanned centuries and continents. It was a network of commerce that thrived on human suffering and exploitation, leaving an indelible mark on the world. The Atlantic slave trade operated on a scale never before seen. It involved the forced migration of millions of Africans who were torn from their homeland and sold into slavery. This trade was driven by the insatiable demand for labor in the New World, where European colonists sought to exploit the rich resources of the Americas. European ships, laden with manufactured goods, set sail for the African coast, where they traded their cargo for enslaved Africans. These ships were part of a triangular trade system that connected Europe, Africa, and the Americas. The goods exchanged included textiles, rum, and firearms, which were used to purchase human lives. In Africa, the slave markets were bustling with activity. Enslaved Africans captured through warfare, raids, or betrayal were sold to the highest bidder. Families were torn apart and individuals were stripped of their identities and freedom. The human cost of this trade was immeasurable as countless lives were shattered. These captives, chained and crammed into the suffocating holds of ships, faced a harrowing journey across the Atlantic. The conditions on board were appalling, with little regard for the health or dignity of the enslaved. Disease, malnutrition, and abuse were rampant, leading to a high mortality rate among the captives. Enduring unimaginable suffering on the Middle Passage, the captives were subjected to a perilous journey across the Atlantic. The voyage could last several weeks, during which the enslaved were confined in cramped, filthy conditions. The psychological and physical toll of this journey was immense, as many did not survive the crossing. The perilous journey across the Atlantic was just the beginning of their ordeal. Upon arrival in the New World, the survivors were sold at auction and forced into a life of grueling labor on plantations, in mines, and in households. The legacy of the Atlantic slave trade is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and a stark reminder of the capacity for cruelty within human societies. Slavery, however, was not unique to the Atlantic trade. Ancient civilizations from Egypt to Rome also relied heavily on forced labor. These early systems of slavery laid the groundwork for the more extensive and brutal practices that would follow in later centuries. Today, the shadow of slavery still looms large. Modern slavery, in the form of human trafficking, forced labor, and exploitation, affects millions worldwide. Despite international efforts to combat these practices, the global demand for cheap labor and services continues to fuel this dark industry. The fight against modern slavery is ongoing, with numerous organizations and activists working tirelessly to end these inhumane practices. The resilience of those who have survived and the collective efforts to eradicate modern slavery serve as a beacon of hope in the struggle for human rights and dignity. Scars on the soul-enduring legacies of two slave trades. The Arab and Atlantic slave trades, though distinct in their contexts and characteristics, cast long shadows over the world. They fueled racism, colonialism, and economic inequality, leaving scars that linger to this day. These trades also set ancient global trends in forced labor, which have evolved into the current global trend of modern slavery. The Arab slave trade, spanning centuries, established early patterns of human exploitation and forced labor across vast regions, from Africa to the Middle East and beyond. The Atlantic slave trade, driven by European colonial powers, forcibly transported millions of Africans to the Americas, creating a legacy of racial discrimination and economic disparity. These ancient practices have evolved, manifesting today as modern slavery, where millions are still trapped in conditions of forced labor, human trafficking, and exploitation. Understanding these legacies is crucial for grappling with their present-day consequences, including the ongoing fight against modern slavery. By acknowledging the past, we can better address the injustices that persist today. Whispers from the past, lessons for today, contemporary relevance. The echoes of these slave trades reverberate in contemporary struggles for racial justice, economic equity, and human rights. The ancient global trends of exploitation and subjugation have left an indelible mark on our societies. From police brutality to mass incarceration, the legacy of slavery continues to shape our world. The systemic racism and economic disparities we witness today are direct descendants of these historical injustices. Recognizing these connections is essential for dismantling the systems of oppression that persist today. Activists and educators are at the forefront, striving to bridge the gap between past and present. Ancient global trends of exploitation and subjugation have evolved into the current global trend of modern slavery, affecting millions worldwide. Human trafficking and forced labor are modern manifestations of these age-old practices. Addressing these ancient and modern injustices is crucial for creating a just and equitable world for all. International coalitions and grassroots movements are working tirelessly to combat these issues, ensuring that the lessons from history are not forgotten. Breaking the chains, a call for remembrance and action. Remembering the horrors of the Arab and Atlantic slave trades is not just an act of historical reflection but a call to action. We must confront the legacies of these systems, challenge ongoing injustices, and strive to create a world where the dignity and humanity of all people are respected and protected. By understanding ancient global trends, such as the extensive trade networks that spanned continents and the exploitation that fueled them, and recognizing the current global trend of modern slavery, which continues to trap millions in conditions of forced labor and human trafficking, we can work together to end these practices and ensure freedom for all. Through education, activism, and international cooperation, we can honor the memory of those who suffered and build a future free from the chains of oppression.